Hey everybody, good evening. Thanks for joining us for another update on Tropical Storm Eta. Just getting the latest data in for the 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time advisory. Still dealing with a tropical storm, but it is a bit more intense, and it is expected to be a Category 1 hurricane as it makes its approach over the Florida Keys going into later on tonight or early morning tomorrow. So we'll dive right into that here in a moment, but I want to take your attention to the app here and show you what this thing is looking like on radar. I've overlaid our winds layer so you can see where the circulation is, because the rain itself isn't a very clear counterclockwise rotation at the center. We're beginning to see some of those rain bands move counterclockwise and somewhat close up around the center from what you can see here on the winds. So that's pretty on par with what we're seeing coming out of the National Hurricane Center, that Eta is getting its act together. It took a pass over Cuba today. Didn't really hinder it all too much because it was a very short time over land, and these are very warm waters here. So once again, beginning to get its organization together, its act together, and is expected to do pretty well tonight as it's over very warm waters. The upper environment is doing being pretty cooperative for the storm, so it should continue to intensify into a Category 1 hurricane going on into the next several hours. So that's where we're at right now. You can see the Florida Keys right there, US 1 outlining and stringing them all together there. So folks there have already been seeing those squally conditions with very gusty winds, very heavy downpours moving not only through the Keys but also up into parts of South Florida. Take a look at all this rain moving across South Florida. Where we are in Central Florida, we've had a couple bouts of rain, but really the issue here has been the wind on the fringe of those bands and the upper atmosphere. But looking at the app here, you can tell there's a lot of rainfall moving across South Florida. And I want to show you some of the video that we have coming out of Florida here. I think we're going to start with the one in Miami, Florida, and we got a view of some of the stronger winds that we're moving through. You don't see the trees moving too much here. What's that, Damien? What are we hearing here? Oh, it looks like our app might be frozen here. All right, guys. Well, we'll work on that. We're going to take you over to our WSI graphics now, and then we'll show you some videos of what it's looking like in South Florida. But I can tell you, very rainy. We've got some flooding conditions and gusty winds coming down at times. But on infrared satellite imagery, that's what we see. It's the bird's eye view with the sunlight there. This thing was beginning to look much more organized throughout this afternoon in terms of clouds, beginning to get that counterclockwise spin going together. Now we're losing that daylight, so less clarity, but you can see those thunderstorms bubbling up, and so it shows us that Eta is beginning to use the resource of those very warm waters to get its act together. And on the infrared satellite, you can really tell the span of this storm. So this shows us the clouds, not necessarily the rain. That's what those bright colors are: moisture, cold cloud tops in the atmosphere. So yeah, beginning to see in the center of circulation there some of that obvious counterclockwise spin, and then of course all of this fanning out of its clouds going all the way up into North Florida, southeast Georgia as well. So we're beginning to see what Eta has in store for folks here across the Florida Peninsula. The latest track, let's see if we've got our 7 p.m. update here. We've seen today an interesting shape in the cone, and we've got this dip down towards the southwest, increasing to a Category 1 hurricane with its intensity, and then coming back over the Florida Peninsula as we head into the later part of next week, approaching the following weekend. So the reason for this tilt towards the southeast is because of a low pressure system in the upper atmosphere that is formed over Cuba. That's kind of influencing Eta's path, taking it down away from the track, and then that whole system begins to move on a northeasterly path. So that's why we see that cone redirect back towards the peninsula of Florida. Where exactly Eta may meet the western Florida coastline is still a big question that we have here. You can see the cone very wide. We've got a lot of area to work with here as to where we could see. And remember, the cone only accounts for the center of the storm. So bottom line here that you need to keep in mind if you have loved ones in Florida, if you are in Florida, is that we got quite a bit of rain in store for us here, and the potential for some very strong winds at times as these bands move through. No matter where Eta makes a second landfall through Florida, the first being through the Keys tonight, we're pretty confident about that. But wherever it comes back through in the peninsula of Florida, that's more up in the air. We don't know exact location, but we do know a lot of folks here across the peninsula are going to be dealing with the impacts from that storm. Likely to be a tropical storm or maybe even a subtropical storm by then. It's going to be losing a lot of those tropical characteristics later on in the week because it's somewhat merging with the upper level system. So that would just mean that that wind field expands out and more folks will be dealing with the gusty, squally weather later on into this week. So that's later on down the road. Let's look at the current forecast as it pertains to folks tonight going into tomorrow. Watches and warnings are up for folks across South Florida and the Florida Keys. An update today was that we had hurricane warnings issued for Monroe County, the Florida Keys, the extreme tip of the peninsula there, highlighted in red. And along Cuba, the tropical storm warning was allowed to expire, but we did have that upgraded in the Keys to a hurricane warning. And I just want to double check to make sure our graphics did take that 7 p.m. update. It's a little bit after 7, but this came in a couple minutes ago. And maximum sustained winds, once again, 65 miles per hour. At 74 miles per hour, then we'll see that get that Category 1 hurricane designation. That has not happened yet, but is expected to happen as we head on into tomorrow. So that hurricane warning is in effect for the Florida Keys from Ocean Reef down to the Dry Tortugas, and that includes Florida Bay. So the Dry Tortugas are the extreme tip way past Key West of some islands. It's a national park. And all the way up to about Card Sound Road where the Keys meet the peninsula under a hurricane warning. That means as the storm moves over there and it makes that transition into a hurricane, they're likely to experience those effects, not only in the immediate vicinity where the center passes, which will likely be in the lower Keys, but folks even down in Homestead, Florida City, on the peninsula of Florida are likely to see some of those gusts approaching 60, maybe 70 miles per hour with those bands moving through tonight. So something to keep in mind if you have anything loose in your backyard and you live in South Florida, even up to Lake Okeechobee, anywhere within these warning areas, you're going to want to take some measures, make sure some things are hunkered down so you don't have debris flying around, and prepare for the potential for some flooding, because that is going to be a big problem for folks here across the southern tip of Florida. Speaking of the wind potential that we'll see going on into tonight, I want to show you our arrival of tropical storm force winds. This is when we expect them to be coming through. The colors showing you the strength of those winds. So purple being 60 miles per hour or more, putting this into motion throughout the rest of tonight. Notice folks in Miami-Dade County, even out west, Collier County and the Everglades, could be seeing some of those very strong tropical storm force winds, maybe some gusts over that range in excess of 70 miles per hour, isolated at that. And then you can see the dip that Ada is going to take down to the southwest. But as we go on through the next couple of days and it makes that approach towards the peninsula, we'll have to watch this forecast very closely to see what's going on. We're still monitoring the risk of storm surge all along the southern coastline of Florida. And namely, I think the rip current threat that expands up both sides of the Florida peninsula, all the way up to Jacksonville, all the way up to, say, Cedar Key and the Big Bend of Florida. Rip currents are going to be a very big problem for folks here as Ada kind of does this dance around the Florida peninsula. So please don't make any plans to go swimming on the Florida beaches. Stay on the coastline. Don't get into the water. Don't go too far, because rip currents are a very, very big possibility and problem for swimmers that get out there and get stuck in the undertow. But storm surge here expected to be anywhere from 2 to 4 feet. Of course, much worse on that southeastern side of Florida and along the Florida Keys, on the Atlantic side of the Keys versus the backcountry Gulf side. So please keep that in mind as you make your plans out there. If you have any friends that live down in the Keys, I think they know this time and time again. The past couple of years have been pretty busy for them. But just to keep in mind, storm surge and the flooding from that is a big threat for folks living down there. The water around the southern tip of Florida is a big player in the forecast and very warm where the center of Ada is right now. So you see the icon moving. It's just west of the Keys. Some exact measurements here. It's 65 miles east of Marathon. That's in the middle to lower Keys, and 90 miles south of Miami. So it's approaching here pretty quickly. But some of these sea surface temperatures are still bath water warm. The magic number for these tropical systems, 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So I want to show you right where it is. We're looking at readings at 88 degrees Fahrenheit along the path of where we expect it to go, 87 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as we get a little bit closer to the peninsula itself, we have this shelf that kind of comes off the landmass as it goes underwater. We begin to see things a little bit cooler, at least here on the west side. But one thing that will play a major role in how strong Eta is as it passes by the peninsula and eventually when it makes that recurve back towards Florida is the Gulf Stream. That's been a big fuel. You know, it's later on in November. You don't typically have these very warm water temperatures, but notice how the contour moves all along the coastline of Florida here. This steep drop off of temperatures, except here on the southeastern side of the state, and goes up here. That is the Gulf Stream that we're looking at. So this right here is going to be a determining factor in the intensity of Eta going into the next couple of days. If it continues to remain near the Gulf Stream, it'll have access to those warmer waters and help fuel it. But like I said, as it makes its trip back somewhere on the western coast of Florida, be it over on the more southern side of the peninsula up north, at that point it's likely going to be losing those tropical characteristics, meaning the fuel source for the storm is not necessarily going to be reliant on these warm ocean temperatures. So that's somewhat of a silver lining to look to in the later part of the forecast. Again, talking Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this upcoming week. So some of the spaghetti models today have begun to get a little bit more in agreement here going on through today. Of course, we've had fairly good agreement for the earlier part of the models, but days 3, 4, and 5 have been very not in agreement. We've just seen models doing wackadoodle things like this one that we see going up the east coast of Florida. Not a likely scenario, but these ensembles taking the data that the hurricane hunters have been gathering from inside the storm that we can pick up from buoys, from the radars on land, and they throw these into these computations, quadrillions of mathematical equations coming out at a time. That's what the models are looking at. They take the data points and just plug and chug them through some math equations, and that's how we get these individual spaghetti plots, the infamous plots. So starting to see some more sense in these where they're in similar agreement on a shape that this storm will be taking. So we have some agreement going across the Florida Keys, mostly the middle Keys, lower Keys, Key West. You could get the center to pass over. Either way, all the folks in the Keys are going to experience some of Eta going on into later tonight, early morning tomorrow. We see almost a unanimous decision here with the dip down towards the southwest because it's getting roped up into the upper level system. And then the disagreement comes in the later part of the forecast, days 4 and 5, in where exactly we could see the storm come through. Would it be closer to Tampa Bay, riding near the I-4 corridor here? Or would we see it hit a little bit further north? We're going up into the Big Bend of Florida here. That remains uncertain at this time, and we're hoping to get some more clarity as we head on to the middle part of the week and Eta begins to make that turn towards the northeast from its most southwesterly point all the way over here. So that's a bit of an update of what's going on. Damien, let's bring up some of those videos. I think we should start with the one in Miami to show you the view from someone's balcony. This video comes to us from Alexa, and she was showing you a squall that had come through. They've been getting more and more rain throughout today. Not too much movement in the trees here, but we have seen things getting a bit sporty out there with a couple of those bands, if you can call them that. They're not super organized, but some of the bands moving through the area. So it's been quite a day for folks out on the road there in Miami-Dade County, especially as you're going over some of those overpasses on I-95 or the Palmetto or anything like that. Now I want to take you to some video from Hialeah, Florida, of the flooding that's beginning there because we've had rain before Eta came into the picture. It's been raining a lot in South Florida. The past couple of days have been pretty rainy, and now Eta is coming to add to that total, and we'll see some more rain coming into the forecast here. The possibility of some flooding is definitely in the forecast for the next several days. Those flooding concerns come from the rainfall totals that are expected going on into the next 3 days. At that alone, South Florida could see up to 7 inches of rain in addition to what they've gotten so far. Thankfully, the bulk of the rain looks to be off into the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, but isolated places, according to the National Hurricane Center, could be in excess of 10 inches of rain, a foot of rain, and in some very isolated spots could be 18 inches of rain. and that's in such a short period of time. So folks there definitely need to be prepared for the flooding risk that could come from this storm. And then as you move up into central Florida, you're going to get some rain too. 3 to 5 inches of rain as far north as the Space Coast, even as we head on into the next couple of days. And then Jacksonville into southeast Georgia, 1 to 2 inches, and that remains all the way pretty much down the I-4 corridor. Places north of that likely to get less, but this only goes out 3 days. So by Thursday and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when Eta comes back through the peninsula, we're likely to get some more rain here and add to these totals. So it is going to be a very rainy week here for Floridians going into the next couple of days here. Damien, let's pull up the app. Let's see if we can get this here. Bear with us, guys. We are, yep, okay. Just a minute. Okay, everybody. We've got this back up again. So here's the radar showing you we've got some banding going on across parts of South Florida. Really just a blob of rain earlier today for Miami-Dade, Broward, West Palm Beach counties. Palm Beach County. And today we're starting to see some more organization in the storm. Looks like what you would typically see from a tropical system, some banding, the center beginning to look a little more cohesive here. I wouldn't quite say an eye. We don't have that yet on satellite, but we probably will here in the next couple of hours begin to see more of an obvious center on radar, or at least through infrared satellite. Beginning to see things close off a little bit here on the western side of the storm. But I want to draw your attention to the winds layer here. Notice that counterclockwise spin extends outside of Eta, and if you look over the Yucatan Peninsula, that's the area in that bluish purple on the left side of your screen, that's some pretty strong wind. This is looking at 500 millibars, so the middle part of the atmosphere, remember I was talking about this yesterday, the mid-levels, that's where we look for the steering with this storm. So that very broad counterclockwise motion here is that low pressure system developing in the middle part of the atmosphere over western Cuba and the tip of the Yucatan there. That's a system that is going to cause Eta's jog down to the southwest before this whole thing begins to push towards the northeast. So that's the reason why we have such an odd shape in the forecast track and the cone, because this system has been developing and is ultimately influencing Eta's movement here as it kind of ropes the system up. It's also part of the reason why we think that Eta will begin to lose those tropical characteristics as this broader low pressure system begins to rope this system in. So a complicated forecast. These late season storms, you know, they're not all that common, and when you do get them, they give you a run for your money here. And of course, this has been a storm that caused devastation down in Central America last week. Thankfully, we won't be seeing that here in Florida. We won't be dealing with a major hurricane, but we will be dealing with a potent tropical storm, likely a Category 1 hurricane here as we head into the rest of tonight for folks down in the Florida Keys. And then stay tuned for what's happening later on in the week, and we'll really know what to expect for folks in the broader part of the southeast. But for now, I wanted to give you an update. I'm going to look one more time and see if we got any other updates coming out of the National Hurricane Center here. Just to reiterate, that tropical storm warning is still in effect for the Bahamas. They've been getting some of that squally weather today. And the tropical storm warning does extend from the Florida coastline of the Brevard-Volusia County line down to Englewood. It also includes Lake Okeechobee, and the tropical storm watch is in effect from the Florida coastline from north of Englewood to Anna Maria Island. So some things to keep in mind for you tonight. We will be giving another update when the next full advisory comes out at 10 p.m. We'll have our graphics running so you can see the latest advisory here, and you can follow along with us in the MyRadar app and track along with us. And then we'll have another update coming out in the fast forecast early in the morning. We'll have the latest information there too, and some more updates coming throughout the week, of course. Stay with us as we cover this storm, and until then, hope you have a great rest of your weekend, guys. We'll see you back here soon.
absolutely necessary.